The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, and Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk, The Urgency of Intersectionality. Now, I chose to start us off by reading these two thinkers because they help us to think about the various forms that discrimination can take. And in particular, they help us to think about how white supremacy operates. And I wanted to start with them because they center the lived experience of Black women, which I think is crucial for our understanding of anti-racism. Now, to start with Audre Lorde, Lorde gave this talk in 1984 at a feminist academic conference. So her audience was other feminists, largely white heterosexual feminists, whereas Lorde herself was a Black lesbian. Now, their collective goal at this conference is to enhance the lives of women and to upend patriarchy, to challenge it, to enhance women's rights. However, as Lorde notes, she is only one of 2 Black speakers at the event, and she's the only lesbian. And she was contacted, last minute to give this talk. One of her largest claims, I think one of her most important claims, and which, as we'll see, connects her to Kimberly Crenshaw, is that racism, sexism, and homophobia are inseparable. And that's a quote from Lorde. She writes the following questions. What does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? It means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable. So in this case, Lorde is critiquing the notion that challenging patriarchy without decentering whiteness and without decentering heterosexuality will only lead to some change, right? It will still leave many women affected. So if the goal is to upend patriarchy, but white supremacy is still firmly intact and homophobia is as well, then that only works for some women and it doesn't work for everybody else. So when she makes the statement, quote, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, she identifies white supremacy as also being upheld in part by patriarchy and by homophobia. So to be anti-racist, we might extrapolate from Lorde. We have to identify how racist structures are upheld by not only white supremacy, but also by patriarchy and feminism. So we might also, and I might add to this, right? We might also think about how ableism and transphobia are also implicit in such an argument. And let's switch over now to Kimberly Crenshaw, right? Who 5 or 6 years after Lorde's talk, coined the term intersectionality. And it's a term that we can now find everywhere. But let's try to understand it in its original meaning. And hopefully you had a chance to watch Crenshaw's lucid, powerful, and also disturbing TED Talk. It really came out of a legal context. So Crenshaw is a legal feminist scholar, and she coined intersectionality as a way to talk about legal discrimination against women of color. So it's the way that the law leaves women of color vulnerable on account of their gender and race. As Lorde would say, patriarchy and white supremacy, right, are inseparable. Now, I really like the way that Crenshaw calls intersectionality a frame for both holding and perceiving problems that would otherwise be invisible to us. And we might think about, learning anti-racist strategies as being exposed to new frames of understanding how culture works and how suppression works. Crenshaw points out that many of the victims of police shootings are women, she talks about police shootings of Black people, but how we often don't know the names of women who have been killed by police because of this issue of intersectionality and because of gender, right? It's because of women's invisibility, Crenshaw argues, that we don't often say their names or know their names. I would add to this, again, right, that other forms of discrimination are also pertinent here. There's another collective of Black disabled activists called the Harriet Tubman Collective, and they estimate that between 60 and 80% of Black victims of police murder are either deaf or disabled. Okay? So within any racial or ethnic group, there are other markers of identity that create overlapping forms of discrimination and suppression. If we think about Lord and Crenshaw together, anti-racism can only be effective if we start to think about white supremacy as a multi-pronged system that renders Black, brown, and indigenous peoples as lesser than, and also that white supremacy casts other categories within race as also subject to suppression, namely sexism, homophobia, ableism, transphobia, and so on, right? So to be anti-racist is to identify and name these interlinked oppressions and to reject them, okay? So now you're going to go to the discussion post on D2L. I've included a discussion question there for you. Write about a paragraph or so. And then at the end, please remember to include a question for your classmates, and also be sure to respond to one of your classmates' posts. You have until Thursday midnight to complete this work. And then for next week, of course, we have more reading. We will be looking at Toni Morrison's recitative, and I believe also reading a blog essay on imagining race in the Hunger Games. You can access those under readings of content of your D2L. So please read those things and be ready to discuss them on Tuesday in our next Zoom class. Okay, until then, take care and be safe. And please reach out if you have any questions, okay? Have a good one.